Hello. In part 1 of arthrology, I have discussed about the introduction and classification of joints. I have explained about the characteristic features of synovial joint. Then I have also started with the joints of the upper limb, which includes the sternoclavicular joint, the acromioclavicular joint, and the shoulder joints. Uh, I hope you will enjoy the session. Let's start with the session now. In part 1, I will cover the basic introduction about joints, like various type of classifications, various types. Okay. Then with following lectures, we will be covering with all the joints of the upper limb, then lower limb, and also we will try to cover the joints in the vertebral column. Okay. So coming to part 1 of this arthrology, it's a study of joint. Okay. So a joint is defined as the articulation is a place in the body where two bones come together. So usually formed of fibrous connective tissues and cartilage. Okay. The main function of joint is to give skeletal mobility and hold these 206 bones together. Okay. So joints classification, when we speak about it, we are classifying mobility wise as well as structure wise. Okay. So when according to mobility, we classify the joints as immovable, slightly movable, and freely movable. Okay. That's what we call it as the synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis, the slightly movable joint, and diarthrosis, that means the freely movable joint. In other way, the synarthrosis or immovable joint is also called as fibrous joints. The amphiarthrosis or slightly movable joint is also called as cartilaginous joint. The diarthrosis, that is a freely movable joint, is also called as synovial joint, is also called as the synovial joint. Okay. So these three classifications, synarthrosis, amphiarthrosis or diarthrosis, are also called as immovable, slightly movable, and freely movable joints. These immovable joints has to be fibrously connected, and slightly movable joints will be made of cartilaginous in nature, which allows slight degree of movement. Then the freely movable joint, we call it as the synovial joint. In fact, each synovial joint has certain characteristics. We will discuss about that. Okay. Coming to the structural classification, there are three types of structural classifications. One is the fibrous joint, then the cartilaginous joint, and the synovial joint. Okay. So these are the three types of structural classifications. Let's go to the functional classifications. Okay. It is classified according to the amount of movements allowed in the joint. Okay. One is synarthrosis, that is immovable. As I told you, it is fibrous joint. Second variety is amphiarthrosis, slightly movable, and it is cartilaginous joint. For example, in between vertebral bodies, then in the sternum and the ribs, there are cartilaginous joint. Okay. Diarthrosis, as such, all the major joints in the limbs, all are freely movable, which we call it as the synovial joints. Okay. So coming to the fibrous joint, there are subtypes. In fibrous joint also, there are three sub classifications. One is the suture joints. Okay. For example, skull joints, like they are united by the sutures and there is no movement. Okay. Then syndesmosis and the gymphosis. We will see these three. What is suture joint, what is syndesmosis, and what is gymphosis. Okay. So coming to suture joints, as I told you, the skull bones, these sutures in the skull bones are very shallow during the time of birth. Okay. As the child grows, as the baby keeps growing, these sutures are formed and it comes and fuses. Okay, and this doesn't allow any movement. They are rigid interlocking joints. Okay, then allows for growth during youth, and in middle age sutures will ossify, and those ossified suture joints we call it as syntosis. Okay, those ossified suture joints we call it as the syntosis. Coming to next variety in the movable joint, that is a syndesmosis. There are two bones which is held each other by strong ligamentous structures that doesn't allow any movement. Okay, this is what we call it as syndesmosis. Example, this is the tibia, and this is the lower end of the fibula. So both these bones are connected by the ligaments. Okay, we will see what are the ligaments anatomically in detail, but this doesn't allow any movement. Okay, that is important. That's what you have to understand about syndesmosis. Then the third variety is gomphosis. We call it as pig in the hole. Okay, so for example, this is a mandible or the maxilla. The tooth is inserted into the socket. Okay, so this tooth is attached to this mandible by a dentate ligament. Okay, and this doesn't allow any movement. There is no movement taking place in the insertion. So if there is movement, then the tooth will try to come out. During old age it is common. Okay, so that is this type of variety of joint in the immovable joint is gomphosis. So these are the three varieties in the immovable joint. One is the suture joint, syndesmosis, and the gomphosis joint. Okay, so you can see this joints of the skull, then tibiofibular joint, and also the insertion of tooth inside the socket, that is a peg in the hole. Okay, we call it as a gomphosis. Next, the cartilaginous joint. Previously we have discussed about the suture joints, that is immovable joints. Now we will discuss about the cartilaginous joints, that is these joints they allow slight degree of movement. This joint they allow slight degree of movement. Okay, so slight degree of movement in sense like it is slightly flexible in nature, but as such there is no any frictional movement that is taking. This is what you have to understand. So in this cartilaginous joint you have two classifications. One is the synchondrosis and other is the symphysis. Synchondrosis, if you see, it's a bar or plate of hyaline cartilage unites the bones. For example, the epiphyseal plate. I will show you the picture in the next slide. Then the next variety is symphysis. It is the place where the two bones are united by a fibrocartilaginous disc. Okay, so for example, if you see, this is an example of synchondrosis. See, for example, this is epiphysis and this is a diaphysis. Both are united by a cartilaginous plate. Okay, in children's bones, if you see, this cartilaginous plate is visible. We call it as epiphyseal growth plate. So this joint, it doesn't allow any movement, but still the bones are slightly flexible. Okay, so this variety is called as synchondrosis. Whereas if there is a disc in between the two bones which is acting as a shock absorber, we call it as symphysis joint. Okay, both these things said to be allowing few movements. Okay, few degree of movement. Then the third variety is the synovial joints. The third variety is the synovial joint. If you see the synovial joint, there are certain characteristics for synovial joints. Okay, and free movement is allowed in this joint. Okay, most of the joints in the body are the synovial joint. In fact, free movement is allowed. We will see that in detail. Okay, so coming to a typical synovial joint. Okay, you take, it may be joint in the shoulder or in the elbow or in the hip or in the knee or in the ankle or in the phalanges or anywhere, any synovial joints. All the synovial joint has certain characteristic features. Okay, that means what? The frictioning bone should be covered by articular cartilage, which is made up of hyaline cartilage. Then a joint cavity should be present, in which the synovial fluid will be present in order to lubricate the articulating surfaces. Then articular capsule, the whole joint articulating area is covered by a joint capsule. Okay, the outermost layer and the innermost layer. The innermost layer we call it as a synovial membrane, which secretes synovial fluid, and those fluid will be present inside the joint and it will be lubricating the articulating surface. Okay, so the synovial fluid is a viscous consistency fluid and it gives lubrications. Okay, then apart from this, the extra capsular structures, that is the structures outside the joint, which are the ligaments, which gives stability. Okay, which gives stability. And also all the synovial joints will be having nerve and blood supply. Here as such I told you, there are two bones. Okay, these bones, this blue line is articulating surface, which is covered by a hyaline articular cartilage. This green line is a synovial membrane which will secrete synovial fluid. This is the joint cavity. This is a joint cavity where there will be presence of synovial fluid in order to lubricate during the time of friction here. Then the outermost joint capsule is there. This is the capsule. The capsule will be covering the whole joint. On the capsule there are supporting ligaments. Okay, so these are all the common characteristic features of a synovial joint. But a major synovial joints will have some few bursa like extension, few pouch like extension. We call it as a bursal sac. Okay, which holds synovial fluid temporarily and acts as a reservoir. Okay, these bursas are present like this. I will show you. For example, this is a joint. So what happens? The synovial fluid that is present here will go and temporarily store in the bursas. Okay, so when this synovial fluid level reduces, this synovial fluid from the bursa will migrate to the joint cavity. It will migrate to the joint cavity. Okay, so as well as a tendon sheath. For example, any tendon that is passing by adjacent side of the adjacent surface of the joint will be covered by a synovial sheath. This prevents friction to the tendons. Okay, I will show you here. See, what you see here is, this is a synovial joint. This is a synovial joint, and this is articulating surface. Let me draw. This is the articulating surface of the head. This is another articulating surface. So this is a joint capsule. This is a joint capsule. This is a joint capsule, and here you have the bursa. It's, as I told you, it's a temporary pouch. It is a pouch like structure that collects the synovial fluid. This synovial fluid will come and pour into the joint cavity. Okay, this synovial fluid will come and pour into the joint cavity. The largest bursa in the body is this subacromial bursa under the acromion process of the scapula. That is said to be the largest bursa. We will see all the structures when we discuss about each and every joints. Okay, so this is common characteristic features synovial joint should have. So now the synovial fluids, they allow different types of movements. Movement as such, there are flexion movement, extension movement, abduction, adduction, then circumduction, internal rotation, external rotation. Different types of movements are there. Okay, so here you understand, wherever this movement is taking place, that is, there is free range of motion. So each and every joint will have certain joint range of motion. Okay, that also we will discuss. So more than the normal range, a person cannot force a joint to move. Okay, so in that we have to understand what are the different types of movement. One is a gliding movement, which is taking place in between the wrist bones, that is the carpal bones. Next is angular movements that is taking place in the spine, cervical spine. Okay, so this hyperextension flexion is taking place in the lumbar spine here. Okay, then these are all called as angular movements. Then next movement is the shoulder flexion, then knee flexion, knee extension, shoulder hyperextension, and after flexing then the joint should go for extension. This is normal, this is extension. Okay, whereas if you want hyperextend, this is the normal range. We will see all the range. Okay, then abduction. So this is a midline. If arm or leg is going away from the midline, we call it as abduction. When it is coming towards the midline, we call it as adduction. So when you rotate the hand, okay, we call that movement as circumflexion. Then other rotation movement is, for example, this pivot joint can the atlantoaxial joints can allow rotation to the right side and left side, so that this movement is called as rotation movement. Then this synovial joint itself, there are different types. One is the gliding joint, that is the plane joint, we can see in the intercarpal joints. Then hinge joint, most of the joints are hinge joint. For example, elbow, knee, ankle, all our examples are hinge joint. Then phalangeal joints. Okay, so then pivot joint is like, I will show you the picture and explain, then only you will understand. Then another, it is condylar joint in the wrist. Saddle joint is there, that is present in the carpometacarpal joint of the first finger, that's the thumb. Then ball and socket joints, you can see this in shoulder and the hip. Okay, so what the picture you can see here is the example of a plane joint. Okay, where the gliding movement is taking place. You can see the arrow, the gliding movement is taking place in the left and right side. Then hinge joint, it moves only in one direction. That's what we call uniaxial movement. It allows only flexion and extension. Okay, in the elbow you can flex and extend, that's all. That's the speciality of hinge joint. Then saddle joint, it can allow biaxial, that is in two axes the movement can be allowed. One is abduction and adduction and flexion and extension. So this can take place in the carpometacarpal joint of the thumb. Okay, then condylar joint is there. So in this is also allowing the movement in two axes. So the flexion and extension and abduction and adduction is taking place. It can take place in the condylar joint. Example, metacarpophalangeal joint of the wrist joint. Okay, then pivot joint, as I told you, this bone will rotate on this bone. Okay, so this is superior inferior radial ulnar joint is an example of pivot joint, and also the joint between the atlas and axis, the C1 and C2 vertebra. Okay, we call it as the pivot joint. Okay, then ball and socket, as such, you know, you put a ball in a socket and you can rotate in any plane and axis. Okay, so example, the shoulder and the hip joint. Okay, for each and every joint there is a normal range of motion. Coming to the joints of the upper limb, we have to start with this sternoclavicular joint, then we will go with the acromioclavicular joint, and then the shoulder joints. We call it a shoulder joint complex. Okay, I will explain you why we call it as shoulder joint complex. Before that, let's not deviate. And this is the sternum, the breastbone. This is the sternum, the breastbone. We call this sternum as a breastbone. And you know, this sternum has three parts. One part is the body part, and then this part is called as the xiphoid process, and this part is called as a manubrium. We call it as manubrium. And this is a sternum, this is a clavicle. This is the clavicle, and this is a medial aspect of the clavicle. It's also called as the sternal end because it is articulating with the sternum. So if you look at the ligaments around this, the joint between the manubrium of the sternum and the clavicle is called as sternoclavicular joint. So you have one sternoclavicular joint on the right side as well as on the left side. So coming here, coming to the, this is a example of synovial joint. This is an example of synovial joint, and this part, coming to the capsule, I mean the ligaments around the joint. So you have the anterior sternoclavicular ligament, okay, then you have the interclavicular ligament and also posterior clavicular ligament, posterior sternoclavicular ligament. So these are all the ligaments that is allowing the sternum to be in a position, and these are the articulating surface. Okay, this is the articulating surfaces in the sternoclavicular joint. You can see there is a clavicular notch in the manubrium of the sternum. So that is, and this area, and this is the sternal facet of the clavicle. So what happens here, this bone is very important to transfer the body weight to the midline. So any fall in the outstretched hand can lead to sternoclavicular dislocation. You can see here, this is the anterior dislocated sternoclavicular joint. You can see this joint is coming up. Okay, so in the radiological finding also you can see this is a sternum, and you can see the dislocation in the posterior side here. Okay, so likewise this takes place when a person falls with the outstretched hand. This takes place when a person falls with the outstretched hand. So this is the sternoclavicular joints. And coming to the movements that is taking place in this joint, you have to observe here carefully this trapezius movement when it is elevating the shoulder. When this trapezius movement is elevating the shoulder, you can see this sternoclavicular joints allow the gliding movement. Okay, this is a movement that is taking place in the sternoclavicular joint. So in fact the trapezius is responsible for creating movement in the sternoclavicular joint. Okay, the trapezius is responsible for creating movement in the sternoclavicular joint. Okay, let's go to the shoulder complex now. Why we call it as a complex? Okay, here the shoulders are of highly complicated structures. Okay, for example, if you see, there are three joints. One is this acromion process of the scapula, and this is the lateral edge of the clavicle. So acromioclavicular joint, joint number 1 is present. Then this is the glenoid fossa of the scapula, and this is the head of the humerus. So this joint is the glenohumeral joint. Okay, and moreover this is the scapula. This is the scapula, and this is the ribs. Okay, so if you see both these, so when during the time of movement, there is articulation that is taking place between the scapula and the ribs, okay, and the thoracic cage. So that's why you call it as scapulothoracic joint. So you know what, this joint is highly complicated. First what we will do is, to understand this, we will look into the ligaments that is present in the acromioclavicular joints. Then this is the coracoid process of the scapula. We will also look into the ligaments that is present here. Then also we will look into this glenohumeral joint. Okay, let us approach step by step. Before going into the ligaments in the acromioclavicular joint, we will see what are the few bursas that is present around the shoulder joint. Okay, so as I told you, these bursas are a temporary, it's like a pouch like structure that is holding the synovial fluid, or we can call it as a temporary reservoir of synovial fluid. You can call it as the temporary reservoir of synovial fluid. So in that case, you have this subcutaneous acromial bursa. One bursa is there, and here between the coracoid process and the clavicle, you have the coracoclavicular bursa. Then This is the subacromial bursa. This is said to be the largest bursa in the human body. This subacromial bursa is said to be the largest bursa in the human body. So there are many cases with the subacromial bursa calcifications, okay, which prevents the abduction of the shoulder. So this frozen shoulder is a very complicated conditions where in which all these bursas, these ligaments, all these structures goes for hardening, and it doesn't allow any free range of motions. Okay, so this is in that case, as I told you, this is the subacromial bursa, which is said to be the largest bursa in the subacromial space. Okay, I will remove that. Next you have the subdeltoid bursa. Okay, this is present between the deltoid muscle and the upper end of the humerus. Between the deltoid muscle and the upper end of the humerus. Then you have the coracobrachial bursa. Okay, this is present between the coracobrachialis muscle. I will show you here. Okay, this is the coracobrachialis muscle and this is the subscapularis muscle. So in between these two you have this coracobrachial bursa. Okay, so this is what you have to understand. This bursas, they prevent friction between these two structures. Okay, next, apart from this, you have the subtendinous bursas of the subscapularis muscle. This is between the subscapularis muscle and the glenohumeral joint. Okay, then apart from this, you have the subtendinous bursa of the teres minor muscle. Okay, in the posterior aspect you have another bursa. This is the infraspinatus muscle bursa. Okay, this is present between the infraspinatus muscle. Okay, now this is the infraspinatus muscle. Here. So this is infraspinatus muscle and the joint capsule. Okay, so these bursas are mainly present to prevent the friction during the time of muscle contraction. As I told you, all these ligaments, bursas, all are made up of connective tissues. So coming to the acromioclavicular joint, this is acromion process and this is a clavicle, lateral one third of clavicle. This joint is called as the acromioclavicular joint. Okay, so there is one acromioclavicular ligament that is attached between holding the acromion process and the clavicle. Okay, inside this you have a joint capsule. You have to see, whenever you study about major joint, you have to know that all the major joints will have a joint capsule. Apart from that, outside the capsule there are some ligaments and there are some capsules in some joints that is present inside the joint also. Okay, so once you remove the capsule, you can see the articulating surfaces. Okay, a capsule is like a pouch like structure which holds the synovial fluid. Okay, so in between this clavicle and acromial process, you can see a small fibrocartilaginous disc. Okay, and this type of fibrocartilaginous disc is also present between the clavicle and the sternum. Okay, in the sternoclavicular joint. Okay, so now this is the coracoid process. This is a coracoid process and this is acromion process, and this ligament is called as coracoacromial ligament. This ligament is called as coracoacromial ligament, and between this coracoid process and this clavicle you have the trapezoid ligament that is attached between the clavicle and the coracoid process, and also this deltoid. Okay, so these are all the ligaments in between this joints. And now let us go to the ligaments that is present in the glenohumeral joints. So as I told you, this is a glenoid process. This is the glenoid fossa. Glenoid cavity. This border is called as a glenoid labrum. Okay, this is called as glenoid labrum because there is thick articulating cartilage in the border, so that's why it's called as the glenoid labrum. That's why it's called as a glenoid labrum. Okay, so now this is the humerus. If you see the head of the humerus, this is hemispherical in shape. Okay, a sphere means 360 degree. Half of the sphere is hemisphere. Okay, so this is the articulating cartilage. So the important thing you have to understand here is the socket of the scapula and the head of the humerus is very shallow. Okay, so before discussing about that, we will see the ligaments that is present here. Okay, so this is the glenohumeral ligament. This is the glenohumeral ligament, and this ligament is holding the head with the glenoid labrum. Okay, and this is the coracohumeral ligament that between the coracoid process and the humerus. Okay, when you remove this, you can see a fibrous glenohumeral fibrous capsule. This is like a fibrous capsule. If you remove this, you can see the synovial membrane. This is synovial membrane. Inside this, you have this glenohumeral ligament. There are extra bands. Okay, there are superior, middle and inferior glenohumeral ligaments. Okay, now what you see is the joint capsule. What you see here is the joint capsule, and this is called as the glenoid labrum. This is called as the glenoid labrum. It is like a thick cartilage. It is like a thick cartilage. Now what you have to see here is there is some important aspect. The biceps muscle tendon. Okay, the biceps muscle tendon. Okay, yes, you see this is the biceps muscle tendon. Okay, this point is called as the this point is called as greater tubercle. This point is called greater tubercle, and this point is called as a lesser tubercle. So this is a transverse humeral ligament. So this pit is called as bicipital groove. Okay, so through this groove, the biceps muscle tendon is going inside the joint cavity and attached to the superior aspect of the glenoid fossa. Okay, so that means what? This tendon is becoming the intracapsular structure in the shoulder joint. This tendon is becoming the intracapsular structure in the shoulder joint. Okay, so this is very interesting. Now why this is going inside the joint, we have to know. Before that, you can see, let us think practically. You know what, this is the socket and this is the ball. This socket is not like it doesn't practically, you see, when you keep a ball in this socket, naturally it will dislocate, it will fall down. Okay, because this socket is very shallow. Okay, and moreover, if you see this joint capsule here, okay, now what you see here is this is a cut section. This is a cut section. I have cut this head of the humerus and in the scapula in sort of like a frontal plane. Okay, so observe this. This is a joint capsule. Okay, and this is a synovial membrane. I will remove the synovial membrane, and this is the inferior glenohumeral ligament. I will remove that. Now you see this is a joint capsule. What you see here, the capsule should be covering the whole articulating surface. Okay, so it is covering. In fact, see in superior aspect it is covering, and inferior aspect the capsule is very lax, very loose. You see the inferior aspect of the joint capsule is very loose. The inferior aspect of joint capsule is very loose. That is why the inferior dislocation of the glenohumeral joint is very common. Okay, the superior dislocation is rare, anterior dislocation is rare, posterior dislocation is rare, but the inferior dislocation of the glenohumeral joint is very common. And moreover, you can see the joint capsule of the the joint cavity of the glenoid fossa is shallow, and the hemispherical head also doesn't correctly fit into the glenoid fossa. So because of this, what you have to understand is the muscles and the ligaments that is present around the joint is giving adequate support to prevent the dislocation of the glenohumeral joint. Okay, it is giving adequate support to prevent the dislocation of the glenohumeral joint. This is what you have to understand here. So what happens, so practically when you speak, whenever there is a patient with hemiplegia, which is paralysis of one side of the hand, what happens, there is no movement and muscles will go in for atrophy. Okay, so when the skeletal muscles are weak, you hold the hand and pull the patient up, then there is inferior dislocation of the shoulder joints. For a normal person, once there is dislocation of the shoulder, there is high chances of recurrent dislocation of the shoulder joint. Why? Because once this joint capsule is laxed, it is stretched too much and it causes dislocation. Whenever those muscles relax and easy pulling out, it can lead to recurrent dislocation of the shoulder joint. Okay, so this is happening because of this kind of complicated anatomical arrangement. You see, in the inferior aspect, the joint capsule is very lax, very loose. Okay, that's why the inferior dislocation of the joint is common. And moreover, you can see now this biceps muscle tendon is entering into the joint in the intracapsular structure. I will show you now. Okay. Okay, this is a biceps muscle tendon. Okay, and this is a joint capsule. Okay, and these are the articulating surfaces. You can see now the biceps muscle tendon is going inside the joint and it is attaching to the superior aspect of the glenoid fossa. Okay, so during arthroscopy, when you put a camera inside joint and view, you can see one tendon here. Okay, so that is a tendon of the biceps. This is a tendon of the long head of the biceps muscle that is present as a intracapsular structure. Okay, now I am going to tell about the joint range of motion and the muscles that is responsible for this range of motions. Okay, so as I told you, the shoulder joint is a very complex joint. So its shoulder joint is an example of ball and socket joint, and there are many movements that can take place in the shoulder. To the joint range of motion of the shoulder joint, as I told you, the ball and socket joints can give movement in any direction. Okay, so there is flexion movement, extension movement, abduction movement, adduction movement, internal rotation movement, external rotation movement. Okay, and also we are going to see each and every movement and muscles that is responsible for each and every joint movement. Okay, so if you see here in the shoulder, the muscles around the joint are responsible for any movement. Okay, so for example, the flexion of the shoulder range is 180 degree. Okay, the flexion of the shoulder is 180 degree. That is mainly caused by this deltoid muscle. Okay, deltoid muscle, you have anterior deltoid. Okay, so this is the anterior deltoid muscle fiber, this is the middle deltoid muscle fiber, and this is the posterior deltoid muscle fiber. Okay, so when this the main muscle of this shoulder flexion is the anterior deltoid muscle, okay. So this is the flexion which is for which the hand is going to 180 degree. Okay, this is 180 degree movement that is taking place in the flexion. Okay, then coming to the abduction, the abduction movement is done by this middle fiber of the deltoid. This is a main muscle. Okay, abduction is also 180 degree movement. Abduction is also 180 degree movement. Okay, so you can see here, this is the abduction movement. Okay, this is the abduction movement. Okay, so there are many interesting facts that you have to observe in the abduction movement. Okay, so you see, from 0 degree to 45 degree, from 0 degree to 45 degree. Okay, here this is 0 degree to 45 degree. The movement is taking place in the glenohumeral joint. Okay, you have to see here, this is the, just observe carefully, from 0 to 45 degree the movement is taking place in the glenohumeral joint here. Okay, so after 45 degree what happens, this humerus is blocked by the acromion process in the scapula. Okay, so what you have to do is, okay, this is the acromion process, this is the, sorry, the posterior to that you have the acromion process. Okay, so what happens, the head of the humerus is stopped by the acromion process. Okay, now you see here, so what happens here, the movement is not taking place after 45 degree in the glenohumeral joint. That means what, after 45 degree the movement is taking place in the scapulothoracic joint. Okay, this is a combination movement, this is a combination movement. You see, first few degree, okay, you see here, just you have to observe carefully. Okay, till now this is 45 degree, the movement is taking place in the glenohumeral joint. Okay, from now the movement is taking place between the scapula and the thoracic wall, between the, that's the movement that is taking place in the scapulothoracic joint. That's the movement that is taking place in the scapulothoracic joint. Okay, and you know what, this is called as scapulohumeral rhythm. This is called as scapulohumeral rhythm. And you know, there is another important thing that you have to understand. Okay, so you know what, up to 45 degree the movement is done by the rotator cuff muscles. Okay, you know, there are muscles around the shoulder joint. For example, this, I will select this. Okay, what you see here is the scapula and this is the humerus. Okay, so these four small muscles, one is the subscapularis, supraspinatus, infraspinatus and teres minor. These four muscles are called as the rotator cuff muscle. These four muscles are called as rotator cuff muscle. So what happens when during the time of abduction, what happens, or any anterior flexion or extension, these muscles initiate the movement in the shoulder up to 45 degree. After 45 degree the large bulk muscle that is present in the shoulder, that is deltoid muscle, is taking over the action. Okay, so what happens generally when there is any strain in this rotator cuff muscle, like subscapularis or supraspinatus or infraspinatus, what happens, there is pain in the shoulder in the initial phase of the movement in the shoulder joint. Okay, so after 40 degree, the pain is vanished. The patient is able to do pain free movement in the shoulder abduction. So when it comes to 45 degree, again the patient starts to feel pain and they are bringing the adduction with the pain. So this is the mechanism. This is called as painful arc syndrome. We call it as painful arc syndrome. So you have to understand the anatomical architecture in the shoulder, then only you will be able to understand the pain that is persisting in the shoulder joint due to rotator cuff injury. Okay, so know that abduction is 180 degree, flexion is 180 degree, then extension. Okay, you know, the extension of the shoulder is mainly done by the latissimus dorsi muscle. Okay, so I will show you. Okay, this is the latissimus dorsi muscle. If you look at the movement, okay, this is extension of the shoulder. This movement is called as extension of the shoulder, which is around 45 to 50 degree. Okay, which is around 45 to 50 degree. So this latissimus dorsi is attached to the upper end of the humerus here. Okay, so when the muscle, that is the climber's muscle, we call it as climber's muscle, the largest flat muscle in the body, the latissimus dorsi, when they contract, the extension of the shoulder is taking place. The extension of the shoulder is taking place. Okay, so coming to the adduction of the shoulder, which is around 35 to 40 degree, which is around 35 to 40 degree, which is mainly done by the pectoralis major, which is mainly done by the pectoralis major. Okay, so this is the adduction of the shoulder. Okay, this is the abduction and adduction. So after okay, so this now this is the adduction of the shoulder. Okay, this is the adduction of the shoulder. This is the adduction of the shoulder. So this is normal anatomical position. This is a normal anatomical position. Still, if you want to bring the hand towards the midline, it can come to 35 degrees, 30 to 35 degree. Okay, that is the adduction of the shoulder. This is done by the pectoralis major, and accessory muscle for adduction is teres major and the latissimus dorsi also. Okay, so now let's go to the internal rotation. The internal rotation is 100 degree. You know, you need a goniometer. There is an instrument called goniometer, which is helpful for, which is used to measure the joint range of motion. So when you look at the internal rotation, this is the internal rotation of the shoulder. Okay, you have to make the patient lie down and keep the goniometer, and you have to lie down, which is around 100 degree range. Okay, so the main muscle is the subscapularis muscle. Okay, the main muscle of the internal rotation is subscapularis muscle, and the main muscle of external rotation is teres minor muscle. This is the teres minor, and they do the external rotation of the, this is the external rotation of the shoulder. This movement is called as the external rotation of the shoulder, mainly done by this teres minor muscle. Okay, so this is what you have to understand about the shoulder complex. So we discuss about the flexion, which is 180 degree, extension, which is around 45 to 50 degree, adduction, which is around 30 to 45 degree, and abduction is around 180 degree, internal rotation is 100 degree, external rotation is 80 degree. Okay, these are all, and circumduction, you know, it is around 180 degree plus 180 degree. You can do complete rotation in the shoulder. Okay, so now clinically you understood about the movement that is taking place in the glenohumeral joint and this scapulothoracic joint, and movement that is initiated by the rotator cuff muscle and then carry forward by the large muscle, that is a deltoid muscle. Okay, so by this I hope you will understand about the shoulder anatomy. By these points I hope you will understand about the shoulder anatomy. And now we have to go to the next joint.